This occurred several months ago when I was shopping at a dollar store. I had gone to the local store by my house just to grab a few items. It's always a quick and easy in and out process there because the store is usually not that busy. On this night in particular, there were a few more people than usual, but still far less than the nearest grocery store. I walked in and grabbed a basket and started going down the aisles. I was in the second one when I noticed a man walking past me. The reason I took notice of this particular man was because he was moving really fast. He too was holding a shopping basket, and it had several items in it. The man looked sort of dirty in a very vague way. He had a short haircut but was wearing these old baggy jeans and a t-shirt that was ripped up in various places. He was also apparently the sort to be wearing socks with flip-flops. He whizzed past me, and I heard him go into the next aisle. I looked over to my left and soon saw him zoom past that one and go down a different one. It seemed like this guy was trying to speed run his shopping trip. He was moving through the entire store. I just went back to my own shopping and didn't pay attention to him for several minutes. I think I was in the next aisle when I heard the man approaching again. I knew it was him because I could hear his flip-flops moving really fast around the corner. He came into my aisle and walked right up to me. Then he stopped his frantic pace. He asked me if I could pay for his basket. I looked down and saw it was overflowing with a bunch of random items. "Sorry, but I think that's a bit much for me." He turned and zoomed off again, going away from me. I heard him go to the next aisle over and ask the same question to somebody else. They also declined, obviously. At that point, he walked away from them. I wondered why the guy was doing this. I simply returned to my shopping. Maybe 5 minutes after that, I was still browsing when the same guy approached me again. This time, I was in a more open area between a few different aisles. He asked me once more to pay for his entire basket. This time, he seemed angry though. The way he said it was almost in a threatening way. I told him no more firmly this time. The man suddenly dumped his entire basket of items onto the ground. They clattered as they scattered about all over the floor. He got right in my face and began to yell, "What's your problem, man?" I was thinking the guy must be on some kind of drugs or something. He started whispering to himself, repeatedly asking what my problem was. Each time he did it, he got louder and louder, and soon he was yelling at the top of his lungs. Some people began to take notice. I didn't really know what to say. I just tried to walk away, but of course he followed me. I asked him very politely to leave me alone, which only caused him to ask me what my problem was again and again. He just kept saying, "What's your problem, man?" This went on for more than a minute. Soon an employee approached us and asked the man to quiet down. He refused. The employee told him he had to leave then. At first the man said no, but he changed his mind. He said fine and started walking away. I think everybody in the vicinity did a sigh of relief when they heard that. Before leaving, the man stopped. He took off his flip-flops and socks and threw them at me. Thankfully, I dodged them. He turned and left the store. After he was gone, somebody said to call the police. The guy was gone now, though, so I don't think anybody really did. I finished my shopping and checked out. I left, and luckily I didn't see the guy again after that. It made for my craziest trip to the dollar store by far, though. A couple of weeks ago, I was shopping at the Dollar Tree. It was later at night, maybe 30 minutes or so before they closed. The store was very quiet. However, when I got near the back corner, I noticed another woman was there. She was just standing in the very back corner of the store, staring at me. Not just looking at me though, she was glaring like she was very angry with me. It was a strange sight. When I first saw her, my only thought was that it was strange. I was also sort of confused. Overall, I just looked away quickly and kept on with my shopping. I went to another area, but eventually I had to go back past the woman. When I did, she was still there and was still staring at me in the same way. There was something so creepy about it. I made sure not to go near that area of the store again. I finished soon after. I was inside the store for maybe 10 more minutes. I didn't see the woman at all for the rest of the time I was in there. I checked out as quickly as I could and left the store. After walking out, I was going out to my car in the parking lot. It was dead silent and dark out there. When I'd almost made it to my car, though, I saw the woman standing there in the lot next to another car about 50 feet behind mine. She was staring at me, just like before. It was almost like she had been waiting for me. It was one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen. I quickly jumped inside my car and locked the door. The woman just kept standing there and staring. I left as fast as I could. She didn't attempt to follow me or anything as far as I could tell, but I was still really weirded out by the whole deal. I made it home just fine. About 2 nights later, though, I found myself going to that same store again. It was just so close to my place and convenient to shop at. Plus, it was really cheap, obviously, with it being a dollar store and all. Anyway, it was also nighttime, and a little bit later on this occasion, in fact. I walked into the side of the store and started shopping. I noticed immediately that the same woman was there again. She was standing in the very same corner she had been before. When I saw her, her eyes immediately snapped to me. As soon as I saw that, I turned around and walked away. I left the store right then and there. Since then, I haven't been back to that particular store. I have no idea what that woman's problem was, but I didn't want to risk a second unnerving interaction with her. It was around this time last year when I decided to use Craigslist as a means to sell a few things. I had to get rid of some stuff. My house was getting pretty cluttered and I planned to get some new furniture. With winter right around the corner, I wanted to get these things out fast. The main piece I was selling were these 2 lounge chairs in my living room. They were really huge and a bit outdated. They were still fully functional though, and didn't have any stains or rips on them. It only took about half a day for a few responses to come in. 2 of the 3 gave me low-ball offers though, so there really was only one guy who was serious about buying them. He wanted to take a look at them after work that day, sometime around 6 or 6:30. I of course agreed. I was just happy to get them out of there quickly. Now, I'd usually try to meet up somewhere public, but honestly, I didn't have a way to transport the chairs, and even if I did, I didn't think I could lift them all by myself. Anyway, I sent him my address and told him to come at 6 o'clock. I turned on the front porch light and opened the curtains on the windows, then sat in the living room on my phone while I waited for this person to show up. Probably 20 minutes passed by before a truck pulled into my driveway. They took a few minutes before getting out and walking up to the front door. I said hello and let him in. He was an average-looking man, late 20s or early 30s, wearing some typical work clothes. His name was Matt, apparently. He started up some small talk, telling me about why he was so excited about getting this furniture. The guy seemed really nice all in all. I felt quite relieved, actually. This would surely be a quick and easy process. He walked around the chair and sat down in it. He seemed to enjoy it, and we talked about the price. He was good to give me what I'd listed it for. Just as we were about to exchange cash, though, we both heard a car door slam shut. It sounded like it was right in the driveway where he'd parked his truck. Matt quickly went outside to check on it, and I just watched, not really sure entirely what was going on. I looked through the window. There were no other cars out there. Someone had to have been messing with his truck. A minute later, Matt came back in. He was clearly angry and said someone had stolen a bunch of things out of his car. I could tell he was not nearly as trusting of me anymore. He clearly thought I had something to do with this. Obviously, I didn't. I said that, but I guess he was right to be skeptical. I was also right to be skeptical of him. I didn't know if this was some sort of setup or anything. Before anything further could be worked out, though, we heard footsteps approaching the front door. We both turned and looked over, only to see a guy in a hood push the door open and step into my house. His eyes were fully bloodshot, and he looked completely insane. His right hand was shoved into his pocket with the outline of a recognizable object inside. He stared at us, standing just a few feet away. He was clearly in a complete state of rage. This guy was young, maybe 18 or 19 years old. It was a dangerous situation. Matt and I both stood there, trying not to provoke anything to happen. Matt told the kid to take it easy and held his hands up and took a step closer. The kid was quick to pull the weapon out of his pocket and aim it right at him. Yes, it could have been fake, but there was no way to really tell. From the way the kid was acting, I don't think it really was. He yelled at Matt to walk out the door. I was in shock. He did as the kid said. The kid then followed him out of the house and held him at gunpoint the whole way to the truck. He had Matt get in the driver's seat, and then the kid got in the back. I watched in horror as he pulled out and drove away. Obviously, this was outside of Matt's will. As soon as they were gone, I called 911. I ran to my car and tried to follow them while describing what was going on to the operator. I soon lost them though, and I couldn't find any sign of them. Police ran an investigation using the information I had to quickly identify who Matt was and his truck's license plate. Over the next couple of days, I was just waiting for a call, but that call never came. Matt and his truck still never turned up. I feel guilty, like I should have done more, but everything happened so fast, and it all felt so risky. I likely could have lost my life as well. Even in those final moments of the interaction, I didn't know for sure if Matt was in on this and it was some sort of elaborate plan. I don't know what that kid wanted, who he was, or why any of it happened. It's been almost a full year though, and I don't think it's likely we'll be finding anything more out. For a while, I worked as a janitor at a university. The college was fairly average-sized, and there were several different buildings on campus. There were a few other janitors working there, and we would all have certain buildings we were assigned to clean. Those would occasionally change as well, so basically I would just do what I was told. When I worked, it would mostly be the afternoon into the night. I would get off at around 10 or 11 p.m. One night, I was working in one of the buildings that had classrooms in it. It was on the west end of campus, sort of on the edge. I got inside the building in the evening, after all the classes for the day had been completed. There were still a few students around studying and such, but not very many. As the night went further on, there was less and less. Most of the time, things were very similar from one building to the other. I started cleaning some of the classrooms out. It would take me quite a while. By around 9 o'clock at night, there was nobody there at all. I had cleaned up quite a bit and was just about to finish in this building and be done. I had 2 classrooms left now. The building had several different hallways, lounge areas for studying, and also offices as well. I was making my way down one of these hallways when I heard footsteps up ahead in the distance. They were going to the direction of the classrooms I was going to be cleaning. I was walking toward that area as well. As I walked further, I saw a man walk into view from around the hallway. He kept going and soon was out of sight. I didn't really think too much of it. He was a long ways ahead of me, and I assumed he was just a student. Sure, it was unusual for people to be here so late at night, but he was probably just doing a bit of late-night studying or something. I kept on going to the classroom that I was going to work in. I arrived about a minute or two later. When I opened the door and went inside, the lights were off. After turning them on, the room appeared to be completely empty. I had my cleaning cart with me with lots of supplies. I began taking off some things and was going to start working, when out of nowhere I heard a noise coming from my left-hand side. I looked over and saw a man running towards me full speed. It was the same guy I had just seen minutes earlier. He was aggressively charging me. I barely had any time to react. The only thing I was able to do was move back and try to get to the door. As I was doing this, the man reached me. I felt him grab my arm and hit me in the back. As I was moving away, he crashed into my cleaning cart and knocked it over. The man fell over as well, so I was able to get away from him and leave the classroom. I could see that he was getting up and getting ready to chase after me. I ran down the hallway and found a door that was a bathroom. I rushed inside and locked it behind me. The man got there 10 seconds later. Looking back, I probably should have tried to leave the building, but I wasn't a very fast runner, and I thought the man might catch me if I tried. He began to try opening the locked door and then started slamming on it with something. Luckily, I had my cell phone on me. I dialed 911. As I got on the phone with police, the man was still ruthlessly slamming the door. I didn't know what on earth his problem was. He continued to try and get inside. I didn't say anything at all. I was worried the door would break, even though it was pretty strong. It seemed to be holding up well, but the man would not let up in his assault. He continued and hit it more and more. The more he bashed against it, the more the door seemed to shake in place. I soon heard the sound of other people in the building. I knew that must be the police. Before I knew it, they reached the man and stopped him from trying to get in. They left the building with him in tow, and I came out to see several officers standing around. I found out the guy wasn't even a university student at all. I still don't know why he tried to attack me and chased after me so viciously. I don't know what his problem was. Clearly, he was a dangerous man. He must have been hiding in the classroom for some reason. I don't think he thought I would go in there. Maybe he was mad at me for entering the room and interrupting whatever his plans were. I still don't know. After that, I never had any experiences like that. I worked at that school for about another year. Then I moved on. That was the most memorable moment from my time there. For the past decade, I lived a quiet life in Utah. I own a small cabin in a town of people living the same type of life as me. There's a town center for shops and everything, but most people own cabins and houses a few miles out. There's either farms or just plain land all around. I didn't farm or anything myself, but I do have a lot of grassy land that borders some mountains. This happened almost 10 months ago. It was around 8 p.m. one night. I was sitting outside by the fire pit on my laptop. I did this almost every night, except when it was snowing out, of course. It was always a calming sort of way to end the evening before going to bed. This night would be different though. I was out there for an hour, really zoned in on my laptop, when through the crackling of the campfire, I heard something out in front of me. I lifted my head and was surprised to see a man standing on the other side of the flame. He was about 15 feet across from me. The man looked like a typical guy in his 40s that would live around here. big and rugged with a large gray beard. I stood up from my chair. "What are you doing here? Where did you even come from?" I tried to hide the shakiness of my voice. The man just stared at me with a look I could only assume was that of someone about to do something terrible. He looked past me and at my house. I kept my gaze on him as he began walking toward the front of the cabin. He went up to one of the windows and peered inside, saying something I couldn't understand under his breath. He turned and started to walk away. I called out to the man again, asking what he was doing. I threw in some unfriendly words as well. The man acted as if I didn't even exist. He walked all the way to where the grass met the trees, and then he disappeared. It was completely insane. Some guy appearing out here by my house was no accident, especially not at this time of night. The way he was acting was beyond strange. It was like he was looking for something in particular and had no fears whatsoever of intruding on me. I put out the fire right away and went inside. I locked up the cabin and grabbed my sidearm just in case. I didn't think he was going to come back, but I couldn't be sure about anything anymore. As far as the police go, calling them out here would take way too long to be a viable option. If something were to happen, I would be on my own. That's just kind of the way things are up here. I stayed up for several more hours past the time I usually went to bed. I kept my eyes and ears open for anything. I don't remember the time, but it had to be at least 1 a.m., maybe even 2. I finally passed out on the couch. I was trying my hardest to stay awake, but it just wouldn't happen. I woke up pretty swiftly though, when I heard an unusual and constant sound. Wind blowing through the house. I sat up confused and tired. I looked over at the front door. It was wide open. I jumped up and ran over to it, looking outside in all directions. I was not seeing anything in the darkness. I slammed it shut and locked it, then turned around to face the possibility of someone being in my home. I stood there by the door for an entire minute, listening for any sounds of someone being inside. It was a small cabin, so even something like heavy breathing might be loud enough to hear. It was dead silent. Only the creaking of the wood from the wind outside could be heard. I slowly searched through the hallways and each room, checking every corner and opening, every door, but nobody was inside. After that, I stayed up all night. As soon as the sun came up, I drove into town and filed the report with the police. I made the assumption that the man I'd seen that night was likely the one who'd broken into my cabin. The one issue with all of this is motive. There were a few odd things missing, which definitely meant he had broken in and walked around the house while I was passed out. Nothing they took was worth any value though, and they didn't harm me either. What they intended is still undetermined, and without knowing why they came to my cabin, there's no saying whether or not they'll come back. I used to deliver for Uber Eats sometimes. It was something I did mostly on the weekends to earn some extra money. I would make deliveries in my car all around the city that I lived in. One night I was working like any other. It was a little bit later though. I got a delivery which was from a nearby local restaurant. I drove there and picked up the order, then left. It took me just a little more than 5 minutes to reach the address where I was delivering to. It was in a pretty large neighborhood that had a lot of homes in it. I parked on the side of the street in front of the house I was supposed to deliver the food to. Then I got out of my car. As I did so, I noticed it was pretty dark and quiet on this street in particular. There weren't any other cars driving down, and nobody else was outside. I guess that wasn't really a big surprise at this hour. I walked up through the front yard to the front step of the home and rang on the doorbell. After I did, I looked around. I noticed that there was a man walking down the street a ways away. He was heading in the direction where I was. The owner of the house answered the door, and I handed him his food. I turned and left to go back to my car. I walked back through the yard and got inside my vehicle. That's when I noticed that the guy I'd seen walking down the street earlier was approaching me directly. I started my engine. After I did this, the man stopped at my driver's side window and knocked on it. I rolled it down slightly, wondering what this man wanted. He was of fairly average height, kind of skinny, with long, stringy blonde hair. He leaned into my window and was too close for comfort. "Hey man, I need a ride." I told the man no, I was working. I was just about to roll my window back up when out of nowhere he shoved his arm through and punched me in the face. It took me by complete surprise. I wasn't knocked out or anything, but it really hurt. The next thing I knew, he had reached all the way in and grabbed my car keys out of the ignition. He turned the engine off and took the keys from me. I was still recovering from the punch at this point, sort of in a daze. He'd suckered me right in the left jaw. He opened up my driver's door. I got out on my own because I wasn't in a mood to try to fight this guy. He already had an advantage, having my keys, and he'd already landed a solid blow on me. I didn't know what this guy was capable of. I took off running in another direction. The guy got into my car and drove away. I did have my cell phone with me, so of course I took it out and called the police. I waited for them on the sidewalk, and by the time they arrived, obviously the guy was long gone. I told them everything I could, and got my jaw looked at as well. Luckily, all I needed was some ice for it. Several days later, the police located my vehicle, abandoned on the other side of town. It was in a mall parking lot. Several days after that, the man who stole it from me and hit me was apprehended. I'm really glad that my crazy experience had a good ending. Two years ago, I lived with my younger brother on the East Coast. For the most part, though, we didn't really go out much. I mean, we'd hang out with friends a lot and get food or whatever, but we never really went out and did anything interesting. I started to look up things to do, and one of the most common suggestions was to go camping. We were right along the Appalachians after all. I told my brother, but he didn't seem to be very interested. A couple days later, I went out and bought a few things like a small tent and some safety tools. I packed up one of my old backpacks and drove out to a nearby trail. Yes, I was really inexperienced, and going camping alone was not a good idea, but I'd only planned to be out for one single night. I figured that even if there was a problem, it wouldn't be that bad. After an hour or so of driving, I got to the trail. No other cars were parked there, and I didn't see any other people either. I got out and put on my backpack, then walked over to the trailhead. It was a thin and not really well-made path, but it was good enough for me. I don't think this was really a popular trail. I just found it by randomly scrolling through a huge list and choosing one that wasn't too long. As I hiked down this path, it became more and more clear just how little used this trail was. Bushes were overgrown and blocking the way. In some portions, the grass had even grown over it and made it really hard to tell what was the trail and what wasn't. After an hour, I made it to the end. After seeing the trail, I reached about what I expected the campground to be. It was a small and mostly overgrown space, but there was something I noticed right away. It really caught my attention. There was a pile of logs on the other side of the campground. I walked over to it and saw that charred flakes of wood were blowing off in the wind. It had to have been used very recently, maybe even just the night before. I looked around again, not seeing any tents or signs of anyone else being there. I was unsure about things. I went to the other end and put my things down, then got to work on the tent. It wasn't that late yet, so I took my time to make sure the tent was well made. Once I was done, I took a breather, sitting down and chilling for a minute. There was about an hour left of sunlight. I spent it eating and sitting inside the tent on my sleeping bag. After a while, I could tell the sun was setting. Soon after, a sound came from somewhere nearby, a crackling sound, like from a campfire. I unzipped the opening and stepped out. Immediately, I could see a man sitting across the campsite, right next to where the half-burnt logs were. He was an older man, probably in his late 40s, but there wasn't much else I could see from the little amount of light coming through the trees. He was already looking right at me. I nervously waved my hand at him. The man waited a few seconds, then lifted his hand as well. I went around to the back of my tent and got a pile of sticks, then made a small campfire. It only took a few minutes before it was completely dark out there. The only lights were from our campfires. I kept looking over to see if the man had a tent or a backpack or anything. All I could see was him. Every time I looked, I got more weirded out and uneasy. Where did the man even come from? My tent was set up right next to the trail, so surely I would have heard him walking by. That is, unless he'd come from the other side, which was nothing but empty woods. I sat out there for at least an hour, probably 2. I never saw the man move from his spot. He just sat by the fire with a 1,000-yard stare. Eventually, I went inside my tent, figuring I had to be overthinking all of this. Surely the man was just another camper. He was on a public camping ground after all. I laid down and tried to get some rest, but I don't think my mind would let me sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint crackling of the man's fire. I was in there for another hour or so before I heard leaves slowly crunching. Someone was making their way toward my tent. I sat up and listened more carefully now. I could see the shadow of the man standing on the other side of the fabric. My whole body froze, watching him just stand out there. He didn't move at all, and didn't speak either. Just as suddenly as he'd walked up to me, his shadow started moving away. I heard the leaves crunch into the distance. I quickly unzipped the tent and looked out. The campground was empty. The man was gone, having left only the burning logs as his remnants. I started to pack up, shoving the tent into its holder, and even breaking some of the rods just to move faster. I left without ever seeing the man come back. As for why he was out there, or what he was trying to do, I really don't know. Back in the day, I delivered on Postmates for a while. Postmates is a food delivery app, if anybody doesn't know. This was in 2017 or 18, I believe. During that time, I lived right in the city and rode my bike just about everywhere. In fact, I didn't even have a car. I would also use my bike to deliver for Postmates. It was a great way to get some exercise in and to make some money as well. My favorite time to work was on nights and weekends. I made pretty good money too. I remember one time I was working a night. I got a delivery at about 10 o'clock. I don't remember exactly where it was from. After I picked up the food, I had to ride a few blocks over to a bit of a quieter area. By now, most of the streets were pretty quiet anyways, though. It was a street with a lot of smaller houses on both sides. I remember I pulled into the small driveway and hopped off my bike with the bag of food in tow. I walked up and left it on the step, then rang the doorbell. After that, I headed back to my bike and got on. When I rode back down the driveway, I saw another guy riding a bike in the street. The entire street was dead quiet, so it was sort of strange to see the man riding. He was wearing a suit and tie and had sunglasses on as well. Needless to say, it was a very weird and out-of-place sight. After I left the driveway, he began slowly riding toward me. I rode away, and when I turned, I went down another street. I thought that I was way ahead of this guy, but I soon heard a bike bell ring behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw the guy in the suit was riding a little ways behind. It sort of creeped me out a bit. This was all just really strange. I kept riding and was going back into the city. After about 5 minutes, I happened to look back again. I saw the guy was still following me. This was so weird. I decided it was about time to stop working and just go home for the night. I lived in an apartment in the city, about 5 more minutes away. I started to ride over. I had to make several more turns in the meantime. I tried to ride my bike faster to get away from this strange man, but even after making it most of the way back, with several twists and turns, the man was still right behind me. I was so weirded out by this guy. Obviously, I wasn't going to stop and ask him why he was following me. I kept going. Soon, I arrived at my street. There were several apartment buildings and businesses on it, but it was pretty quiet at this hour. The businesses were all closed up. I rode my bike right up to the front, then got off it and quickly attached it to the bike rack. I was good at doing this quite fast. As I did so, I watched the man continue to ride right up to me. I thought he would jump off his bike and say something, or do anything at all, but he didn't. He just rode right past me on the street. He looked over at me as he did. I turned and ran inside my apartment building. I was relieved, but still very confused by this. I went up to my place on the 3rd floor, and then went into the living room. I looked out my window. The window overlooked the street out front. When I looked out, I saw the same man in his suit again. He was just riding his bike around in a circle, ringing the bell over and over. I could hear it because my window was cracked open a little. I kept watching the man as he slowly rode around, going back and forth. He was just riding in circles on the street in front of my building. I watched him for 15 minutes or so. I stepped away for a bit and came back, and he was still there. I closed my window and covered it, and tried not to look again. Sometime later, I just couldn't help myself. I looked out once more. The man was finally gone. He'd rode his bike around my street out front for 30 minutes at least. It was really weird. I have no idea who the guy was, or why he followed me. When I was maybe 7 or 8, I lived in Compton, California. We had a small garage that was at the end of a closed alleyway. My cousins, brother, and I would go out and play soccer or ride bikes down that alley when we could. Those were kept in our tiny garage, by the way. One day, we went down to get the bikes out of the garage when a black SUV that looked like an Explorer sped down the alley and skidded to a stop right in front of our open garage. I think it was an attempt at blocking our view of what happened next. All of a sudden, a bald guy was thrown out of the car. 5 more bald Latino men in white shirts and jeans jumped out and began savagely beating the man on the ground. One man stood guard in front of the SUV while this was going on. I guess he'd failed to notice that we were there. I told my younger cousins and brother to run inside as I shut the garage door. We took off running into our apartment complex to hide. The guy standing guard saw us when we took off, but no one followed us as far as I know. Still though, that was one of the scariest things I ever saw when I was a kid. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.